Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to the Board of Trustees meeting for the Utah Transit Authority. Today's Wednesday, July the 1st. I'm joined by my colleagues Beth Holbrook and Kent Millington, and I'm Carlton Christensen, Chair of the Board of Trustees. In accordance with the Governor's executive order, we are streaming our meeting live. Public comment was received previously, was distributed, and certainly we welcome any comment in regards to the meeting or other affairs with UTA through our public notice or our public website. We'd like to begin first with a Safety First Minute, and with that we'll turn to Sheldon Shaw. Good morning, Sheldon.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, trustees. Welcome to July. Appreciate the opportunity to give a safety message. With the increase of COVID cases in the state of Utah and the recent orders for mask wearing, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk about the basic CDC guidelines, and those really haven't changed. And what they've always asked us to do is make sure we wash our hands often, preferably which is soap and water. We should physically distance from other people at least 6 feet. We should be wearing a mask when we can't, or sort of some kind of face covering. We need to make sure we cover our coughs and our sneezes. We need to make sure we emphasize cleaning and disinfecting, and we also need to make sure we're monitoring our health. As you can see, we have the safety poster for the month of July, and I want to give thanks to Blair Lewis, who does great artwork for UTA. Appreciate the opportunity, Chair.
Thank you, Sheldon, and I know that we've begun requiring those riding our services starting today, asking them to wear masks, and I'm sure that'll be discussed later on. Our first item up is our consent agenda. We have 3 items, which includes approval of 2 sets of minutes, as well as a minor amendment to a previously approved contract. With that, I'd entertain a motion on this consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve the consent agenda consisting of 2 meeting minutes and the amended contract.
Second.
I have a motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes. That next brings us to our agency report, and with that, we'll turn to our Executive Director, Carolyn Gunott, and for her report. Good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning. Oh, I might get my camera on. That would help. Just wanted to cover a few things, and then the ridership survey, which will be a little bit of a longer presentation, as we've done a pass holder survey and a survey of our existing riders, since during the pandemic. Just a couple things I want to mention. One is I actually want to acknowledge both Dan Harmuth and Kent Mulstein for participating in a couple papers that APTA has produced for the industry. Dan Harmuth was part of developing a pandemic virus service restoration checklist, which is a white paper that's part of the APTA standards development program. He was involved in the privacy and cybersecurity portion of that checklist. And the other paper that was from the APTA standards development program was cleaning and disinfecting transit vehicles and facilities during a contagious virus pandemic, and Kent Mulstein participated in that. And both of those papers are really useful. They've done a number of seminars on those papers throughout with the industry. So I just want to really thank them for their efforts and working on those pretty critical, timely papers that the industry is using right now. The second thing I want to do is introduce our new capital projects director. I'm going to turn this over to Mary so she can give a little bit of a briefing. His name is Manjeet Ranu. And Mary, I'm going to have you just introduce him and then have him say a few words.
Okay, good morning. Yes, I'm very excited to introduce you to Manjeet. He started Monday, so he's very new to the agency. It's a very hard time to come in and meet folks, but he's been meeting folks who are here, and he's been having a lot of Zoom and WebEx meetings and getting to know his team. We did a national search, and he stood out far above the others, so we're very excited. And I am going to turn it over to Manjeet and let him talk a little bit about himself and his background.
Well, thank you, Mary and Carolyn, and it's great to be here. And board, I'm happy to meet you virtually, and I've met some of you here in the building, so look forward to working with you. I am very excited to be here. This is an agency that has a great reputation and has a strong program and a wonderful system that serves this region. My background is land use planning and transportation planning. I've principally been practicing in Southern California for about 15 years, but I've practiced in a variety of states, and I'm honored to add Utah to the latest and excited to be here. I've been coming to this state for about half my life to recreate as a big mountain biker, and I like exploring the parks, and so to be very close to all of those amenities is wonderful here in a community that has a great quality of life. I look forward to supporting the agency and the team and maintaining the assets that we have and expanding the system and doing it in a way that works collaboratively with our partners and across the organization as well. To really work closely with our partners to deliver the plans that we have and to work with them and help you in setting priorities to achieve all that we want to achieve. By all accounts, this is a great organization. I am honored to be here, and again, look very much forward to working with you all. And thanks again in particular to Carolyn and Mary. And as Mary mentioned, I do look forward to actually meeting my team slowly virtually and eventually in person. It's an interesting time to come on board, but we will continue to do great work here. So thank you.
Yeah, and please feel free to go and introduce yourselves to Manjeet if you haven't met him yet. He is sitting in Eddie Cummins' old office.
Well, I'll just quickly interject, Manjeet, on behalf of the board. We're really excited to have you joining the team, and I know that you'll bring a lot of experience and expertise, and so we'll look forward to working with you as well.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so the next, have one other thing to cover before we go to the ridership survey, and this is about the face coverings and masks that are being now required system-wide for UTA riders and employees. We have put together, we actually enforced it starting in Salt Lake County on June 27th when the ordinance went into effect in terms of our bus system, our riders, and our employees at that point. But today is the day that we are requiring it system-wide. There are a series of FAQ questions that we've sent out for the employees to understand what that means. In terms of masks, we are going to be providing them if riders don't have those, and we will actually probably do a few more mask giveaways over the next week or so to actually get masks into people's hands. And we're also looking at putting mask dispensers on our vehicles as well. So if there were any questions on that, we have just sent out some guidelines for the employees, both the operations employees and the administrative employees, in terms of things that we've heard over the last few days since the announcement went out.
Great. Any questions from the board for Carolyn on that item?
No, I read through that FAQ this morning, Carolyn. I thought it was very well done. There are some exceptions, as we all know that there needs to be, but I think the guidelines are very well stated and should not be a burden to anybody.
Right, and we're really looking towards really on enforcing it, enforcing it with education and information to our riders. So that is one of the areas. It's not our intention to refuse service, but if there's concerns, we will deal with that as well by an operator. We will talk to their supervisor, or have the supervisor go out and make a decision. So that's sort of where we're at to date in terms of that. I appreciate the whole team. Lindsay put this together, Wagner, and with Eddie and his team, and Kim, her team, Nicole, and her team, everybody getting this FAQ out the door to answer some questions that I think people were sorely wanting to get a better understanding of. So I appreciate their work on this.
Beth, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you. Carolyn, I did notice in your email this morning in regards to the face masks that there is an intention for us to provide actual masks on the vehicles. Do we have a timeline on how that would work and integrate, or is that still being developed?
I think it's still being developed. I mean, Nicole, I think, is on the line. She and Eddie, we are looking at purchasing mask dispensers and putting them on all the vehicles. So, Eddie, do you know the timing of that?
You know, I don't know the exact timing of it. I know that it's being actively worked on right now. We're looking at putting on the mask dispensers along with hand sanitizer dispensers. And so those are being reviewed right now and should be on order really, really soon. But that's a top priority for us to get those on the buses and the trains.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think that and the continued communications is really going to be helpful to everybody in terms of getting people back to transit. So thank you, and thanks to all the team as well.
Yeah, masks are a lot more available now for us to purchase, so which helps quite a bit. I do want to thank FTA for giving us 37,500 masks to date, cloth masks that they have sent us. They sent them to all the transit agencies across the country, and also Ford had sent our police department 5,000 face shields. So as well. So I really appreciate the industry helping support the transit agencies. So next I want to go to Nicole and Megan Waters to talk about the COVID-19 survey. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Nicole.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's a great segue to talk about our rider and past partner survey and how our riders and past partners what they think about our PPE and how we're doing. So joining me is Megan Waters, our Community Relations Manager, and she's going to talk about the past partner survey. I'm going to begin with our rider survey. So UTA conducted a survey in May about and our objectives of these comprehensive surveys was to really gauge the qualitative and quantitative data that reflects the shifts in ridership behavior and the rider experience in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We wanted to understand what is working well for the rider and our past partner. We also wanted to gain feedback on how UTA could improve moving forward and also inform future efforts in bringing back our ridership. Next slide, please. So in the survey, as I said, it was conducted in May. We had a high response from bus riders, so 65%, and tracks ridership at 58%. As you can see here, we had a little over 1,200 respondents. We also we promoted this through customer service, UTA special services, social media posts, advertisement, community partners, and listserv. From respondents, 54 had ridden UTA during the COVID pandemic. 43% had changed their riding schedule due to COVID-19, and 37% were dependent on UTA for transportation. So this is what we call our transit-dependent riders. And we had a few people respond from out of state. So again, this is our riders. So they were riding either from, they needed it from out of state, they were visiting people, and then we had unique zip codes from 89, but the majority were from the Wasatch Front and the people we serve. Next slide, please. So the questions we asked were the awareness of our safety measures. We wanted to know who knew what we were doing. 78% were aware of our safety measures UTA had taken during COVID. So that's from March to May. One of the other questions that were really important to us was the awareness of UTA's response. So if you look at how well we were doing, we looked at 1 being very bad, 4 being neutral, and 4 being neutral, and 7 being very good. We rated on our communication about changes to service at 5.1. communication about changes to cleaning, about 5.1. If you remember back on our benchmark survey back in April when we presented to the board, we talked about this average rating and trying to gauge where, you know, exceptional is and neutral, and anything above a 4 is very good. So to see a 5.1 was exceptional for us. Anything over a 5 is or at a 5 is really good. Next slide, please. So again, this is a similar question that we asked on our benchmark survey. And so we wanted to gauge and see how the actual experience the rider was experiencing during COVID, and see how well we're doing. Again, 1 being very bad, 4 being neutral, and 7 being exceptional or very good. The average rating for safety while riding was 5.2. Cleaning of vehicles was our highest rating in this questionnaire at 5.3, exceptional, and providing the service was 5. Again, this is their actual experience by riding. So I really want to commend our maintenance crew, our the people that are actually cleaning, and then our riders and and our service providers out there, because this is what our riders are saying during COVID that they see is high quality. So again, this is the experience of the rider during this time. Next slide, please. In the survey, we wanted to see what were the changes in use during COVID. Did we see any changes? We asked them what you did before pre-COVID and after. So as you see, people use UTA for essential services, school at 13%, work 74%, healthcare, errands, and visits. After COVID, you see a significant drop across the board, but what you do see is that we're still a primary essential service need. And so the trips were still consistent with depending on transit for those essential trips. Work is still very high, errands, and then healthcare services. Next slide, please. This was an open-ended question. So participants answered the open-ended question about what's working well, as you see on the left side. And then on the right side of your screen, you see what we wanted to gauge from the public of what we could improve on or what we could do more on. On the left side of the screen, we asked participants the open-ended question, what we're doing. And these are the top 4 answers that we gauged from our respondents in the order they responded. Cleaning and disinfectant came in as the highest answer. Communication, continued operations. Again, you see that we're essential service and they appreciate that we're continued to provide that service. And then also protecting our operators. They appreciate that we're continuing to protect our operators and make sure they're safe as well as providing that safety measures for our riders. On the right hand of the screen, you see that riders want us to continue to provide service. This is no different than we see from our benchmark survey. Service and schedules are always important to our riders. COVID precautions. So us implementing the masks and face coverings for required for our service really hits on this. This was number 2. They love that. I think we're going to see this change in the future, that they're going to appreciate that we've done that. And we've seen that in our social media responses, that we've gotten a lot of likes, we've gotten a lot of thank yous for the mask implementation this week. Communication. They want us to continue to communicate with them, tell us what's going on. And then again, cleaning, disinfecting, continue to do that and improve more. So that's the highlights of our ridership survey. If you have any questions about that piece, let me know. We have questions and answers at the end, but I'm going to turn the time over to Megan for our past partner ridership. Next slide. Survey.
Thanks, Nicole. So we also did a past partner survey, as Nicole said, where we promoted this through our past partner companies and our business development group. this was a high ridership on tracks and frontrunner. You can see on the next slide, please. Sorry. So we received 699 responses from at least 78 different organizations. The breakdown of that, we had good representation from the business sector. So almost 40% of the responses came from folks who work for private companies in the business sector. 32% of the responses came from government or nonprofit past partners. And then we saw also responses represented from schools and universities, healthcare, and then some from unknown or not identifiable. So you can see here some of our results. So 88% of the respondents on this survey said that they utilize their transit benefit. So we did have some who responded who were not transit riders. 83% said they're not currently riding UTA during COVID-19. We also learned that this is a high ridership group pre-COVID. So 58% said they rode UTA at least 3 times per week prior to COVID-19. When we look further, we can see that 88% of the respondents said that they rode at least once per month prior to COVID-19. We also learned that this is a choice ridership group. So 93% of the respondents have access to alternative transportation. Next slide. We asked a similar question that we did on the general rider survey about awareness of safety measures that UTA has taken during the pandemic. 55% of these survey participants said that they were aware of safety measures that UTA has taken in response to the pandemic. We asked the same questions for respondents to rate how we're doing on certain measures related to communication about changes. We received a mean score of 5 out of 7. And just a reminder that it was a scale of 1 to 7, 7 being very good. So these scores are above neutral. We received a 4.9 on communication about changes to cleaning from this survey group. Next slide. On the rider experience questions, we asked about safety while riding. They scored a 4.9 out of 7. Cleaning of vehicles, 4.9 out of 7. And then providing service scored a 5 out of 7. Next slide, please. We also wanted to learn about this group's ridership outlook. So we know that a lot of them aren't riding, but wanted to understand what in the future would influence them to ride again. So we asked about their sort of understanding of when their schedules would be returning to normal. And we saw that only 8% said that their schedules had already returned to normal. 35% said it would be August 1st or later than August 1st, and then 37% did not know. We wanted to know that when their schedules, if their schedules return to normal, would they be likely to ride transit again? And 56% said they were somewhat likely to very likely to get back on board, which is promising. Next slide, please. We also wanted to understand their work environment. So we asked if they had work from home schedules or if they were working in the office, and 62% said they were working only from home right now, with another 21% saying they had a mix of home and office. Only 15% are working from the office only right now. Next slide, please. We asked about what factors would be influential in their decision to return to transit. And so we learned that 47% said that passenger loads and social distancing would be a factor that would increase their likelihood of riding again, along with current cleaning and disinfecting practices at 46%. So this is the percent of respondents that said that these were important factors to them, and they could select more than one. 40% said that they would get back on board if they were required to work from their office location. 33% said an increase in service levels would influence their decision to ride transit again. And 19% said that the availability of PPE on board would make a difference. Next slide, please. So a few takeaways just to summarize. On the general rider survey, we saw that more than half have ridden during COVID-19. Their schedules have changed since the pandemic emerged. Over a third of them are captive riders using transit for their essential trips. Some of their main considerations include service and schedules, COVID-19 precautions, including masks and social distancing, communication from UTA, as well as our current cleaning and disinfecting practices. Next slide, please. Our takeaways from the past partner survey. This survey group is previously a very frequent rider group. They are choice riders with access to alternative modes of transportation should they need it, but they have unknown timelines for returning to transit. Many have work from home schedules available to them full-time or part-time, and they're mostly not riding during COVID-19. Their main considerations include passenger loads and social distancing, our current cleaning and disinfecting practices, as well as work environments and service and schedules of UTA. Next slide. And Nicole's going to talk about our next steps with this effort.
So thank you, Megan. So our next steps are, we have a more summary reports with all the data. We'll be publishing those and sharing those, and they should be finished this afternoon or tomorrow, that we can people can dive in, and we'll publish those. We'll share the feedback with via our open data portal, as well as Ride UTA, and then our recovery dashboard. We'll share the feedback with our employees via email and Talking Transit. Our UTA task force is going to use these findings to inform our service, safety, and communications. So we'll start implementing some of this feedback that we've heard. We'll also have follow-up discussions with our survey participants, past partners, and people that we can share some of the things we've already implemented, like mask distribution and how they can get masks, and also what we're doing to follow up on some of their suggestions. We're also looking at a potential fall 2020 survey, looking at how our EdPass partners will react as school comes back on. So these are our next steps in moving forward with this survey and this information. Are there any questions?
So Nicole, I just want to clarify one thing. You know, we did ask that question and Megan went over it on when do you anticipate your work to come back to normal? And 8% at the time said it would. Now, when they did the surveys, I will say 8% said they would, 6% by June 1st, and 13% by July 1st. So that's really about 27% by now or today would have been returning back to their work schedule. But that still leaves 34% that will be later, that assume they will go back later, and 36% that have no idea when they will be going back. So just to let you know, that's sort of where that breakdown is. I don't want to think it's just 8% right now. It looks like it right now. It has gone up over since the time they did the survey to about 25 to 27%.
Nicole, remind me when you were out in the field on this. Was that May?
It was May. And so that's why we'll want to do maybe a fall check-in, as well as companies and employees, as well as our rider, our scheduling. Our August change day may shift some things as well. So we're thinking a fall survey check-in may be a good opportunity for us to kind of check these numbers again to see where we're going.
And I think also just kind of doing a flashback to May, I think people were maybe more optimistic that scenarios would have leveled out and not have spiked again. So I'm sure we'll see some of that. But it was interesting to see in that survey sort of the need to see, if you will, empty cars. I mean, for folks to come back on board a little bit, and I know we've been doing that, and have been, but I know as we look at our August change day, that probably has some factor in there. One question I had is, and maybe it was back in, I don't know if it was yours or Megan, but things they were requiring and wanting communication, more communication. Do you have any sense of what that means? What kind of communication are they looking for?
I think what you see, it was back in my presentation, they appreciate the communication we've had, and Megan can dive into this in the report, but what they said is in our, for the first time, we did some targeted information to like our fair pass holders, and they appreciated that. So they wanted some more pass some more targeted information. We're starting our alert system. So I think we are at high constant communication right now. I don't think we've run this level of communication at constant as we've in the past. And so I think it's continued at this level. So it's not just improved, it's also continued. And so, Megan, do you want to talk about these? Because these are more open-ended comments, but that's what I'm assuming from the report I read. Do you want to add anything on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think you hit it pretty well. That we used the Fair Pay pass holder email listserv, and people appreciated that communication via email. And so that was something that came up in the comments, just folks interested in having more communication via email and not just through social. I think there was also some level of interest in having more communication about the cleaning practices. So just, did you clean this morning kind of thing, just so that people have more real-time information about getting back on board. And so that's what I saw in the comments.
Mr. Chair, I had a couple questions,
yes,
if I could. And I don't know if it's Nicole or Megan on this, but I wanted to ask you about, I know we had just barely started our sign up, get your communications via text. And I wanted to understand how that's going. And maybe you could just review that. When did that start and what you're seeing thus far? I know it's really new, but maybe just some background on that.
We can talk about our service alert that we launched at the beginning of the month. It's starting slow because we don't really have a lot of riders, but I think to Megan's point, they'd like to see us do a push on this. We're going to do a huge push in August change day time frame. We think that we need to do a better job at explaining what it is. Actually, we're going to do a campaign on explaining what service alerts are. I think we're not having the response we'd like, to be clear. We're going to do a video of how people can sign up because to Megan's point, what we saw in the survey is people are liking the idea of getting the emails, but I don't think they understand what our service alert piece is. And so we're looking at actually how we can communicate that a little bit better to the people that are asking for these sign up, because I think there's a miscommunication of what it looks like. So it's a good question, but the service alert program is basically that any information that you would like targeted towards you, what route information, communication on each individual route, it could be each individual mode. You can target your information from UTA to you. If you want to know about COVID specifically, you can check that box and it can come to your email or it can come directly through text. If you want to know specifically about just information in general, communication in general, you can check that box and it can come to whatever form of media you would like, again, text or email. So I think we need to look at how we can target that information. And we really want to do it around change day when people are looking for more information, and then target the people like our fair pass holders so that they're the ones that are really asking for that communication. That's a great question, trustee. And we're revamping that campaign because we think we need to target who's looking for that information as well.
I don't disagree that I think August change day is a good day, but I also think that survey basically illustrates that communications in general is a repetitive, continual process of saying the same information over and over. And I think that that's probably something we can be looking at doing even with our existing measures, which is our existing channels, which is social medias of varying stages, and any other thing that we can do before the larger campaigns start to take effect. And I had one other question, and this might be to Megan, in terms of the pass holders and the schools. I think Carlton mentioned that, or the chair mentioned that there, at the time the survey was done in May, there was a different perspective and a different optimism of returning maybe more quickly. Are we communicating with our education partners in terms of understanding? Are they still moving forward with their plans to do both in person as well as online classes in the fall? And what are those looking at? And how is that going?
I believe they are. The EdPass partner coordination is done through the business development group through the EdPass partner program, but we have been working closely with them on engagement for students and back to school type of efforts. So I know that we're thinking through how to engage students and faculty and staff that work with EdPass in getting their feedback on some of the similar questions about their experience on transit. We are planning to do some mass distributions for back to school. If there are students and faculty and staff from universities riding transit, if they have in-person classes, I do know there's some hybrid models coming out of schools to do online online and in-person mixed.
So I think in general, Beth, it's really a really good question, because the schools right now are trying to deal with sort of what level of in-person versus virtual learning. It looks like a lot of the schools are still going to have in-person classes. So I think we're going to see some usage, but we're monitoring that with each school, whether it be BYU, Weber State, UVU, University, or UVU. I mean, we're looking at all of them, and then also looking at how the community colleges are going through VOTEX, those types of things. We'll have to continue to keep an eye on, as well as any of the high schools. But, really the universities are a large draw for us. And next board meeting, you'll see the service plan that for the August timeframe that really does sort of take into account what we're going to see at the universities and the schools reopening.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I recognize that it is a constant, communication efforts and with all of the teams. So thank you. And I think that the continued follow-up is going to be really, if we do additional surveys, I think that's really going to help us to really understand more of what it is that our writers are wanting and needing right now. So thank you.
Did you have a question for Nicole?
Just a quick question. Are the results of these two surveys going to be made available generally? Because I know I've had some inquiries from Utah County officials wanting to know what we're discovering. So I'd like to be able to share this with them.
Yes, Trustee Milliton, we're going to have this on our Ride UTA. There's a report page and documents.
Right.
We'll have those both posted there, so you'll see those and be able to
demonstrated the Ride UTA information to them, and I'll indicate to them that they can go there and look this up. Thank you.
So just to let you know, this is part of our sort of our ridership, our recovery task force efforts was to get this survey done. This was sort of planned at the time we had instigated the task force, but it will also be linked to the recovery page that we have. And Nicole, can you just briefly say how that, if they go to that page right now, what we've implemented?
Sure. So if you go to our recovery story map, it will cover a whole vast thing. So it's going to take you through our recovery dashboard that will take you through the summary of the beginning of how we started looking and implementing, the summary of where UTA is, the objectives of working through the task force, through our community engagement, the service, communications, and also our financial stability. It's going to walk you through all of our safety protocols, all of our financial a financial dashboard, a ridership dashboard, and then also our service planning and how all of those. It's going to be a dynamic dashboard, which is, well, it is a dynamic dashboard. It exists today. We just haven't launched it yet because we're working through our mask distribution, but it will take you through how UTA is working through the recovery, moving through each one of these phases. And what's unique about it is dynamic, and you're able to see, as Carolyn asked, to really see the changes and how we move through each one of these sections. And part of this is you'll see service, our August change day, long-term service changes, financial recovery dashboard, where we are in May, April, and June. You'll also get to see our sales tax recovery. And then we'll have these surveys, so you'll see what kind of the data that we're using to give us the information to make these kind of changes. So we were hoping to do a launch this week, but I think, with our mask announcement, we'll do a official big announcement next week, but it is up and running, and we can send that, we can send some information out next week about the full dashboard, but that will also hold our surveys and then other data that the task force will be looking at to implement these measures.
So what we did do is, I know when we put out the recovery guidelines, we put out just a 2-page sort of summary of that. So that's sort of what's covered, but we decided not to put a report that would have to continuously update. So we're doing it on a sort of a website, like a virtual book, and you can scroll through it, and the data changes on the ridership. It shows the ridership changing, what our financials look like. The ridership surveys will be put on there. We'll be doing dials on how far we are on getting the operator barriers up, hand sanitizer. So it'll be much more dynamic, and we're able to change it. I think it's a much more useful tool than having a static sort of book that might be out of date, especially the way things are changing all the time. So I really appreciate all the efforts, and we'll be presenting that to you soon.
Okay, thank you. Just let us know where we can find that so we can point other people to it as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
That was just my request as well. If there's like the website link when you guys can do that, if you could announce it, that would be fantastic. I think that's really helpful. Thanks.
Will do.
See, Carolyn, did you have anything else on your agency report?
I think that's it.
Okay. Well, great report, and Nicole and Megan, thank you for your presentation. With that, we'll next go to item 5 on our agenda, which is a financial report for May of 2020. And with that, we'll go to our CFO, Bob Biles. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning. Thank you very much. We'll head to the next slide and take a look at the dashboard. The first thing you'll notice is sales tax for May was actually positive. We had been anticipating that would be down. We'll talk about that when we get to the sales tax slide, but April sales tax was up about 4.75%. In our modeling, we'd been estimating a 25% decrease. So we haven't seen the decreases in sales taxes that we'd anticipated. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Nope, stay there, please. Fair revenue, it's down. We would expect that, but if you look at that for April, we're down 44%, but the ridership was actually down 65%. So we're seeing a little bit higher fare per rider. And stick on ridership, even though ridership's down, we still carried 1.2 million trips in the month of May. So as you heard in the last report, we're an essential service and we're still providing that service. Operating expense, we had almost 2 million favorable. In May for the year, we're almost 11 million favorable. And then on diesel price, for May, we were $1.10. I don't have the July number yet. So overall for the year, we're $1.51. And that translates to about a $2.9 million savings through the first 5 months of this year. So if you go to the next slide, we'll take a look at passenger revenues. As you can see, in March, we had $1 million deficit. In April, that went up to 4 million total. These are cumulative numbers for budget and actual and the revenue loss. That April number went up quite a bit. We talked about, I think, last month. We had a 9-month offset from our Medicaid contract, so that contributed to that. From April to May, it was about $2 million lower than budget. So we're sitting at $6 million through the end of May passenger revenue loss. Good. If you go to the next slide, this is sales tax collections, and I need to make sure that you understand Utah number is incorrect. That should be 11.3%. Sorry, Board Member Millington, I've got that corrected. But that's 11.6. And again, these are 12 months compared to 12 months. So these have been pretty good. If you look at the April sales tax, which we received in June, most of the counties were double-digit growth over the prior year. The outlier was Salt Lake. It was down about 1%, and they contribute about 62% of our sales tax revenue. So them being down 1% offset and got us to that 4.75% overall. But just to give you an idea, Utah County was up 6% in April, Davis County 11%, Weber County 12%, and then even though they're smaller, Tooele 37% and Box Elder 30%. So that isn't the behavior we expected on sales tax. When we get to the long-range forecast presentation letter, we'll talk about that in a little more detail. So sales tax is hanging in there through April. We'll see what May brings. So if you go to the next slide, this is the sales tax comparisons, just like the passenger revenue. And remember, there's a 2-month lag here. And so we got the April numbers about 10 days ago. So you can see that we are still ahead of budget through April by about $4.4 million, which is good news for us in the long term. So if you go to the next slide, we're tracking the revenue loss versus our CARES funding estimates, and thus far we're showing the passenger revenue loss of $6 million. Our CARES funding estimate, which is based upon operating expense, was about almost $30 million, and we have drawn that down, made the last drawdown today, I understand. So that's helping us with our cash position. You probably saw that in the financial statements. So that's the revenue side of this. Any questions before we head toward the expense side? If not, let's head to expense. We'll look at it 3 different ways. One is variance by mode, and notice that these are all positive. Maintenance of way is the one that's sitting pretty much right on 0. Parts were $180,000 over budget, but utilities are pretty much offsetting that. Utility saves. The large ones in administration, IT director about $1.1 million under budget, executive director $1.1 million, and communications and marketing about $800,000 under budget. And then just to note, in commuter rail and bus, a good amount of that savings is the diesel savings of about $2.9 million. Go to the next slide. This is the variance by chief officer, and again, they're all positive. The largest is in operations, and all of the operating units are positive. So that's really good, and the group's doing a good job there. As far as the executive director, again, it's the IT director and the executive director combined for about $2 million of that $2.4 million favorable variance. And if we go to the next slide, which is the last slide, that's looking at the variance by type of expense, such as wages and benefits, services, fuel. So you can see that fuel is $3.6 million, $2.9 million of that's actually diesel. Up in services, again, it's the IT director, almost $1 million, innovative mobility services, $700,000, and paratransit contractual, about $700,000, makes up the largest savings there. And down in other, we have contingency that we haven't spent of $700,000. Travel and meeting obviously is down, that's about $400,000. And then we're favorable on insurance and claims recovery, almost $400,000. That's a quick tour of the May financial statements. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from the board?
I had a question. Thank you. Structurally, and I know we don't have the numbers back yet, but what when you were talking about the expenses for that are care eligible, how does that structurally look long term? Are they going to are we going to continue to allocate those? And what percentage of that was FEMA, I guess is my question.
Yeah, we haven't had a lot of FEMA eligible expenses. I actually took it off this month's report because we were in the $200,000 range last thing I saw. I can get updated numbers and include that in the next presentation. But the FEMA was relatively low, and we'll claim as much of that as we can. The CARES funding is set up to draw it down based on operating expenses or capital expenses. But then how you actually use it, it's really to be used for revenue offset. And so that one slide was intended to show we have a little bit of a mismatch there. We aren't seeing the revenue loss that matches up with that. So long term, what that means, since we'll get into it in the TFP later, is that provides us flexibility as we go forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Looks like we're good to go forward, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob, for that update and that report. Well, we hope those numbers continue to hold. We certainly will prepare for the worst if it comes. Next is a resolution appointing Ronald S. Ellis as Director of Internal Audit after an extensive search by members of the board, and also with the help of Carolyn, we selected Mr. Ellis as our Director of Internal Audit, replacing Rihanna DeVille. And Rihanna certainly has served us well, and personal reasons is leaving us, and so we certainly are grateful to her service. But with that, although we did let Ron introduce himself in our board, our audit committee meeting, Ron, do you just want to take 20 seconds and just tell us where you're, anything about yourself that you think is important for the public to know?
Well, I think it's important for the public to know that I've had 30 years of auditing experience. I'm currently finishing up my Master of Accountancy. I have an undergraduate degree in hotel administration from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I've been a professional auditor, and my goal is to do a really great job for the Utah Transit Authority.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to working with you. With that, I would entertain a motion on this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve R 2020-07-01, the resolution appointing Ronald S. Ellis as Director of Internal Audit.
I'll second that.
I have a motion from Beth, seconded by Kent. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And since Ron will be an officer of the board as the Director of Internal Audit, we'll ask Kathy Griffiths if he'll administer the oath of office. Kathy?
Raise the right hand. Ron, if you'll please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Ronald Ellis, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Ellis, do solemnly swear
That I will support, obey, and defend
that I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of this state,
and the Constitution of this state,
and that I will discharge the duties of my office
and that I will discharge the duties of my office
as Director of Internal Audit
as Director of Internal Audit
for the Utah Transit Authority with fidelity.
for the Utah Transit Authority with fidelity.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Ron, we'll give you a virtual clapping round of applause. And again, we look forward to working with you and know that you'll contribute much to the agency. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, Kathy, as well. That brings us to item number 8 on our agenda, which is contracts, disbursements, and grants. With that, our first item up is a change order for light rail traffic signal interface with an extension for Pinetop Engineering LLC. And we'll turn to Eddie Cummins as well as Brian Sawyer for this item. Good morning, Eddie.
Good morning. This is the second-year option to the original 4-year contract with Pinetop Engineering LLC for light rail traffic signal interface programming and maintenance. The cost of the second-year option is $65,000, bringing the total contract amount to $390,000. This will be the 6th year of this contract, and staff plans to issue a new RFP for this requirement in January of 2021. There was some initial confusion with this contract. The original agreement specified a 5-year contract with 5 1-year options, with the baseline dates for July 2015 to July 2019, which is only 4 years. As a result, the original 4-year contract plus 5 1-year options makes this a 9-year contract. The UTA Transit Signal Priority System includes components of more than 100 traffic signals that interface with the light rail system. The work contracted to Pinetop Engineering is safety critical and not work that can be performed by our UTA MOW department. Work will be performed and scheduled on an on-call basis and coordinated through the UTA project manager. Work includes, but is not limited to the following: transit signal priority support for all elements of the advanced traffic management system, coordination with UDOT and other local government entities regarding the TSP system, and integration of new signals, communication, and other elements required for the TSP system. Maintenance activities associated with the existing contract include all safety features related to the train, traffic interface, and all programming related to UTA. This includes all preventative maintenance as well as emergency call-outs. Are there any questions on this particular amendment?
Any questions from the board? I'm not seeing any, Eddie. I do think, considering the length of it, that going out to a new RFP makes a lot of sense, and certainly that's not a reflection of their work. I think it's just healthy, and so I appreciate that consideration in January. If there aren't any questions, I would entertain a motion on this change order.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the change order for the light rail traffic signal interface extension with Pinetop Engineering as has been detailed by Eddie.
Second.
I have a motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. That next brings us to a change order for FTA Section 5310 Subrecipient Agreement amended with United Way Community Services. And to that, I'll turn also to Eddie as well as Ryan Taylor.
Thank you. This amendment is to the contract with United Way Community Service to remove 3 14-passenger buses from the previously approved FTA 5310 grant and replace with a maintenance service truck and radio equipment. The cost of this amendment is $0, leaving the total contract amount at $208,000. United Way Community Service operates UTA paratransit service in Utah County, as well as other specialized transportation for other organizations assisting seniors and people with disabilities. United Way Community Service delayed the purchase of the vehicles in the original FTA 5310 contract because UTA was in the process of increasing the number of UTA-owned vehicles for the UTA paratransit service in that area. In the past, United Way Community Services augmented the fleet with its own vehicles, including ones purchased with FTA 5310 funding. The increase of UTA-owned vehicles in their fleet resulted in lowering their need for 14 passenger buses. Under the terms of this agreement, Exhibit A of the as follows. We removed the 3 14-passenger buses from the scope of work. We added radio equipment to replace outdated equipment used for dispatching vehicles, and we added 1 maintenance service truck to provide emergency services to vehicles that break down or need assistance in the system. The 1 accessible minivan to expand service to seniors and people with disabilities is unchanged in the scope of the project. UTA will do the procurement of a vendor for the following vehicle specifications: 1 200 series heavy-duty service truck and 1 accessible 5-passenger minivan. Vehicles and radio equipment are funded with 80% federal funding and 20% local match. As you know, the local match will be provided by the subrecipient. This agreement is a federal requirement for execution of the program and grant funding. Are there any questions Ryan and I can answer on this particular amendment?
Any questions for Eddie on this item? I'm not seeing any. With that, I would entertain a motion on this change order.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that we approve this change order for the Section 5310 subrecipient agreement amendment with United Way Community Services in Utah County.
Second.
I have a motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you.
Next item up is a discussion item for the board, and the first item up is a draft June 2020 transit financial plan, as well as 2021 budget targets. And with that, we'll go back to Bob Biles. Bob?
Thank you very much. You know, as I think about finances, it's kind of like being in a car and traveling. And so what we did earlier in the meeting, we looked at the financial statements. We looked in the rearview mirror to look at where we've been. What we're going to do now is look through the front windshield and see where we're going to be heading. And so that's what budgeting is. Budgeting is looking through the front window. Financial statements are looking through the rear window. So what we're going to do today is review some of the key assumptions of the June 2020 TFP and compare that to the December 2019 TFP. And as you might guess, there's some pretty significant changes. We'll look at the draft TFP, then we'll review 2021 budget targets because it's almost time to start the 2021 budget. And then we'll take a look at the 2021 budget schedule. And so before we start in, I really thought about putting in a slide that says disclaimers and having lots of lines that said these are projections, these may not turn out this way, that sort of thing. So these are our best guesses, and we'll talk about, yeah, okay, it's better than guesses, but we really don't know how this is going to turn out. And so we've done a couple of things differently in preparing the June 2020 TFP that we also want to highlight. So
Bob, you're retiring. Who's going to hold you accountable for it?
Well, you know, economists, you know, with projections, it's always interesting to see projections and how they actually turn out. So if we go to the next slide, this is what the December 2019 TFP looked like. Lots of numbers. I just asked you to focus on the balances at the bottom, because that's really the key thing, is where's our financial position at the end of each year, and are we staying within our reserve requirements and allowing some flexibility. So I'd say a key number to look at is that 2025 number, 203 million. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And then I added 2026 and 2027. You know, we typically look at 5 years, but there's a reason to add those 2 years. And so just keep that in mind, those numbers, and we'll revisit them. So here's what the June 2020 TFP looks like on the next slide. You'll see that that 2025 number is up just a little bit. as are the 2026 and the 2027 numbers. And when I get to the next slide, I'll talk about that, but there's a couple of things to look at here on this particular slide. Again, those ending balances are good, and the other thing I'll point out on the next slide is the January 1 beginning balance under 2020 is higher, and that's related to the capital carryover in budget amendment number 2. So if you go to the next slide, this is comparing those two, and you can see the differences. So let me spend just a little bit of time talking about those differences, and we'll have more detail later. But you'll see operating revenue in 20 and 21 are actually going to be higher. We'll see that that's related to CARES funding. That's helping to offset our anticipated revenue losses in those 2 years. But then when you go to 2022 and on, you'll see we're projecting that there'll be revenue losses, passenger revenue, and then sales tax revenue. Partially what we've done on the operating expense side is, we've reduced service, some routes and some times and things of that nature. And so what that is as you go through the years, it's trying to match up that operating expense to come in line with the operating revenue reduction too. So when you look at the net operations, we have 20 and 21 being very positive, but from there on, we're showing some changes from what we had before. The debt service, the changes there are just from the refundings and the new debt that we put in place since December. The capital revenue and expense changes for 2020 and 2021 are really due to the budget amendment number 2 that was approved recently. But I do want to call your attention to 2025 on capital expense, that $15 million. We added $15 million for state of good repair into the 5-year forecast. We felt like we could increase that. So lots of changes. Look at that last line, December 31st balance. I should point out the January 1 first. So that $18.9 million in 2020, that's essentially the budget amendment number 2 carry forward. But then if you look at each year, we're going to be higher the next couple of years, and then you see that number start to go down. And as you see it go down in 2025 to only $11 million difference, the question is, do we have we set up ourselves to continue that downward slide? And if you go back one slide, that's why I put in the 2026 and 2027 number, so you could see that from 2025 we go from 215 million, 2026 to 213, and then 2027 we start going up again. So we've taken into account just not these 5 years, also these 6 years, but also when we look at the TFP, we're looking at up to 30 years.
Bob, is there any assumption of a potential fare increase in this scenario in later years?
I believe there is. We took it out of 2021 and we may have moved it to 2022. I just have to look at that. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll start talking about how we did the projections. And so this is a little bit different in that before, when we did projections, we just looked at the year and made a rough assumption on the year. What we've actually done is developed another spreadsheet where we're doing projections month by month. And so we've allocated the revenues and expenses by month and made projections. Now on the sales tax, we started with Salt Lake County and the state of Utah. They got together and did some projections, and we used those to come up with our projections for what might happen on a month-to-month basis. And so you can see May, June, 25% reduction, and these are all from what we had in the TFP before. and then dropping to 20%, 17% by the end of the year, about an 8.5% reduction. So in December, what this TFP says, December 2020, is we expect to receive 8.5% less in sales tax than we had estimated in our TFP. Now, our sales tax experience to date hasn't been this. Some of that could be because of unemployment benefits. Some of it could be due to stimulus money. There's lots of reasons that may have upheld the March and April sales tax collections. You know, as we go through the pandemic, what we'll have to do is just monitor these on a monthly basis. And specifically, the spreadsheet I put together allows us to do that. So we can understand how, as we go month to month on revenues, what the impacts would be in our long-term TFP projections. But that's what we have on sales tax. On passenger revenues, we had an internal team who got together, and each of us did a separate projection, and we ended up fairly close, even though we used 4 different methods. And so we took the pessimistic side on the passenger revenues, and so we projected a 73% decline in revenues for passenger revenue for the last couple of months. It hasn't been that. You know, if you looked at the May financial statements, I think it was 44% decline. So this may be a little pessimistic, but the key is thinking about the earlier report you heard on passenger behavior and what passengers are thinking. We put in a 40% reduction in December, saying that, okay, we think, you know, passenger revenues will come back as passengers come back. We're still projecting in this TFP a 40% shortfall from what we had in the prior TFP for December. So that's how we went about doing the projection from the TFP. We got a little more granular, so we could do a month by month type of projection. And that's true for all of the years through 2024. And we actually modeled it after the governor's plan that we would be back in 2022 to whatever that new normal is going to be. And so if you looked within that spreadsheet, you would see these numbers getting smaller, but in the long term, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. In sales tax, I think we projected about a 4% lower, that we would never get back to what we had in the prior TFP. And same thing with passenger revenues, that it would be about 15% lower. So that was our methodology and how we went about doing the projections and some of the sources that we pulled upon to make those projections. So if you go to the next slide, this is the overall operating budget. And just looking at operating expenses and operating revenues, operating expenses. So for the operating revenues, we projected we'd be almost 14% below the December TFP. Next year, about 10%, and this does not include the CARES Act. This is just, our typical revenue. Just 2022, 6%, and then getting out into 2023, which is the year I think we have to model toward, 2023, 2024, 4.8, 4.7, and 4.2%. So operating expenses for this year, only down 8%, next year 5%, and then about 4.1, 4.2% going on from there. Again, just add the caveat, these are based upon our best guesses right now. And you would expect out in 2024, 2025 that those would align as the CARES funding gets allocated probably through 2023 is the effect of how this is working out. So let's go to the next slide. We'll start talking a little bit more about operating revenues. And this really looks at sales tax, passenger revenue, and then everything else. Sales tax is 71% of our revenues, passenger revenue about 11%, everything else 4%, And notice we didn't include preventative maintenance. That's about 14% because there wasn't any change in that assumption. So sales tax, 70%. We're figuring about 11% decline this year, 8% next year, and then that 5 to 4% going onward through 2025. And really, we're modeling that through the rest of the TFP, that we just will not come back to what we had in the December 2019 TFP. Passenger revenues, that declines a little bit steeper because we don't know exactly how passengers are going to come back. There's just lots of questions about opening schools. You know, will businesses change their operations? Will schools change their operations? But you can see that in long term, we're projecting 15% less revenue than we had in the December 2019 TFP. And then everything else that includes advertising, investment income, things of that nature. Additional declines there. And in 2025, we're saying that will balance out as interest rates come back, and as advertising, as passengers come back, advertising should also come back. So while those are fairly large percentages, it's on a small number of our overall budget. So let's go take a look at sales tax now. And here's the percentages there at the top of the reductions for sales tax. Again, this is all from our TFP from December. And give you an idea of the general impact, dollar impact. So in 2020, we're forecasting $39 million less, 2021, $28 million. And then as we get into a settled pattern of what we think is going to happen, notice those ongoing differences. It's 15, then 16, then $16.6 million, and that difference will grow in comparison to the prior TFP. So, we'll have to monitor this month to month and see if that's what's really going to happen in 2020. And we'll have to monitor it month to month and may have to change our 2021 projections. And as we get into the budget process and we have a couple of more months information, we may be able to adjust this. But that's what I'm seeing on sales tax right now. Any questions there? If not, let's head on to...
I think Beth may have a question for you, Bob.
I just had a quick question. You have Salt Lake County and Utah County. I know those are the largest counties in terms of that sales tax collections review and impacts. Structurally, the other counties that we service, would those percentages hold?
Thank you for mentioning that. So what I'm showing here is the Salt Lake County and Utah County fourth quarters, because those revenues, we need to talk to Salt Lake County about how they get used. And so we had projected, I think this year, approximately $30 million from Salt Lake County. So this is saying that there'd be $3.4 million less this year in their fourth quarter. I should have noted that. And then Utah County, because we have an agreement on how those funds are used to pay principal and interest, and then operating expense on UVX, and then repay them on third quarter dollars that they've fronted for the UVX operation and principal interest, and then finally to pay off those bonds. I wanted to show the impact for Utah County fourth quarter separately. So all the other quarters are in the general impact. Thanks for pointing that out. I should have done that earlier. So let's go to the next slide, which talks about the passenger revenue. Again, these are the percentages that you saw before, but here's the revenue impact. So we're projecting $22 million this year, and I should note this includes the revenues through May, and including the sales tax distribution we received in June. So we updated the TFP hurriedly to update these numbers. But the revenue loss, $22 million this year, $21 million next year, partially because you'd have a full year, even though the percentages might be a little bit smaller, you'll have a full year of loss. And then, estimating what might happen with ridership. You're still looking in 2023 through 2025, $9 million a year difference from what we had in the prior TFP. So those are our two main revenues. The next slide looks at all the revenues. So if you go to that, it's got sales taxes, preventive maintenance, no change there, passenger revenue, all the other revenue. Still a lot of money, $5.6 million this year, even though it's a small percentage. So the total line shows that absent the CARES Act, 67 million this year, 52 million next year, then 34 million, and then in the mid to upper 20s in the years after that. So then you have the CARES Act funds, and this is how we think we'll end up drawing it down. It's about 100 million this year and 87 million next year. So what that does is it provides some surpluses, if you want to think of it that way, or positive cash flows in 2020 and 2021 that we'll need in 2022 and 2023 to offset those revenue losses. Now that's absent any changes we've made on operating expense. So that's what the revenue picture looks like. Any questions on that before we head to operating expense?
I had one question, and this might be theoretical, and you might address it maybe at the end, but I'll just put it out there. A lot of the, I know these projections are just simply structural estimates from the financial perspective. Does any of this take into account any economic changes in terms of the overall economics of growth in the state, or is that just really a difficulty to put into this type of an assumption?
Yeah, that's really hard. So the way we designed this is we based it off the 2019 TFP that assumed a 5% growth in sales tax every year. And I know it has an increase in passenger revenues, and I want to say it's 2022 is where we moved it to, because I know the board, wants to talk about fare policy and take some time thinking about what might happen with fares. So I think we moved that to 2022. It's really modeled more after the governor's approach to opening the economy. And the sales taxes, we've based those percentages off of Salt Lake County. That's why I mentioned that earlier, but in the May financial statement report. But we're seeing other counties aren't seeing that kind of decline. So we think we're being conservative here on sales taxes and passenger revenues. At least we have been thus far. But we don't know how this is really going to turn out and what may happen in these out years. So again, I think we just have to look at it month to month, and when it's time to work on the 2021 budget, we'll have to re-estimate these current year revenues and what we think may happen in the next year. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We'll turn our attention to operating expense. And so this has the December 2019 TFP and the June 2020 total operating expense compared to each other. And so it's down each year. So we're trying to be conservative in how much service we add back and how quickly we add it back. And that depends upon how finances actually turn out, how demand surfaces. And I know there's another discussion coming up in a couple of weeks about how that might operate. So I'm not going to get into that in any great detail. Just to let you know that on the operating expense side, we've been a little conservative on what we think we can do. But these are the numbers for operations. And as we get into the 2021 budget, we're going to be targeting that 316 million. Any questions on that? I'm not going to go into great detail on operating expense. There's just a lot of work that will be done on that with the 2021 budget. Okay, if we go to the next slide, this is a quick summary of capital revenues and expenses. Again, the 2020, that reflects the budget amendment items coming over from 2019. And then we moved some projects from 2020 over to 2021. And so that's really what's happening there. And then out in 2025, we added $15 million into state of good repair funding. Eddie would tell you it's not enough, but we'll keep working on that. So that's it on the capital side. I guess the thing to note there is we're not really decreasing capital at all in this TFP. Actually, we added some increases. So as we work through the 5-year plan on capital that Mary's working on right now, that will come to you in a couple of months, you shouldn't expect to see any decrease. If anything, we're going to be working toward how can we increase the amount of money going to state of good repair into some other projects. So if you go to the next slide, ending balances are, of course, a concern. So what this shows is what we had in the December 2019 TFP, the June 20 TFP, and what the required reserves are. And I should note that this is prior to the action that we're taking, that the board's approved on bond reserves. So until that actually gets transacted, I've left those in the required reserves. But when that happens, those numbers will go down about $29 million. So as you can see in 2020, 2021, because of the CARES Act funding, our balances are going to be much higher, it looks like. And then as we start adjusting to the lower revenues and not having the CARES Act funding, there's this planned spend down, which is essentially what we've done for several years, had these planned spend downs. But then when you get to 2025, we're still 28 million above the required reserves. So I think that's prudent. That provides flexibility because we really don't know how this is going to end up. And then if you just want to look at the next slide, this is the numbers behind those reserves. Again, that top line will get reduced by about 29 million here, hopefully this month. And then the undesignated, again, as that goes down in 2025, it's about 27 million that would be available. And then again, add the 29 million from the unrestricted. So in 2025, when that takes place, that'll be closer to $55 million. So again, I think it's wise to have that flexibility right now. So that is the TFP presentation, looking through the front window where we think we might be heading. Any questions?
None, Bob. Although we do have a hard break at 10:30. Remind me how much more you have to go.
I don't. I've got 2 slides.
Okay, if we can do that rather quickly.
Okay, so the next one's the 2021 budget targets, and it just talks about how we got to the targets. So if you go to the next slide. So the way we do the budget targets, we take the 2020 budget and then we show the increases, you know, personnel costs, normal increases for operating other expenses. We had some costs that need to be added, like IT software maintenance costs, that as they come off maintenance, they go on to the maintenance expense. And then we had some decreases. We're programming in about $8.5 million reduction from the 2020 budget. But, you know, we'll wait and see on that. And then there were some one-time expenses in the 2020 budget that need to come out. So the budget target's about that $321 million. And that's what we'll be providing to the departments. And this is broken out on a spreadsheet by department. And then the next slide is just the next steps and how the budget process goes. If there's any changes to the TFP, just need to know that, or to the budget targets. We'll get those changes made. We'll get staff working on the 2021 budget. They'll finish in early September. The board reviews those budgets in late September. And then we have the tentative budget to the board in late October, budget hearing, and then December for the final budget. And that's it.
Great. Any final questions for Bob? Okay. Bob, thank you very much. Thanks to you and your staff and the rest of the folks I know it's a tough calculation sometimes to do it honestly and accurately. So thank you.
Yeah. So a lot of people participate in this, and from the executives down to directors. So it's a huge effort for the organization.
Yeah, I certainly can tell. Thank you, and thanks to the remainder of them as well. Item B, we're going to delay till our July 15th meeting and let them come back and report to us then. And so that brings us, and also our next meeting is on July 15th at 9 o'clock. We have a closed session that the board will go into in a second for two purposes: strategy and session to discuss pending and reasonably imminent litigation, as well as strategy session to discuss the purchase, exchange, lease, or sale of real property. And so with those two items, that also will be held in a different video conferencing session, and we'll reconvene by just shortly after 10:35 for that closed session. With that, however, I'll ask for a motion to enter into closed session.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we enter into the closed session for these reasons outlined.
Second.
I have a motion from Beth, seconded by Kent. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes. So with that, we'll go into our closed session. Thank you. We've returned from our closed session and appreciate your patience. And with that, that brings us to our final action on adjournment. I'll entertain a motion to that end.
Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn our board meeting.
Second.
Motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to staff for another great job.
Hey, Carlton?
I'll give you a call, Kent,
Okay.
unless it's meeting related.
No,
Okay, I'll give you a call.
thanks.